Hello, everybody. Welcome to Digging into the Future. And we're discussing GEAB number 157. And I'm really glad I'm here with Marie-Hélène Caillol. And this is Digging into the Future, episode number 8. Let's just go to the title to start with. It's a fascinating title. It says Back to the Future. So this has a really fascinating thrill to it. So how did you come to choose this title?
Well, because we realized that there was this notion of that there was a moment in this 2021 Afghanistan related in particular events that was in fact convoking past moments and compelling to review a bit the historical narrative of this period. For instance, we analyzed that it is signaling somehow the real end of the Cold War, which doesn't mean that there's not another Cold War that has replaced it, but the former Cold War, the 20th century Cold War between the US and USSR, Afghanistan is sealing that period. So somehow it's sending us back. Of course, everybody knows it, to 2001, because that's when the Americans and NATO invaded Afghanistan. So it's closing that chapter, but it's also closing another chapter, which is that we think of the Cold War. And therefore, it is important at this point to review the logic, the dynamic of history, the historical dynamic, with taking into account this event.
It was all over the news during the summer, and there were a lot of reactions from different parts of the world, of course, but the main starting point was in the US. What does this do for the US and also for the Biden administration?
Well, it is something that was absolutely required, that was in fact initiated already by the previous administration, as everybody knows. So 18 months ago, under the Trump administration, the decisions were made. Of course, towards the end, Trump seems to have wavered, and so it seems that now it's a decision by Biden, but the whole process has been negotiated 18 months before. So it's a very much needed move due to the Asian pivot of the US. Are they really going to pivot to Asia? That's another question, but voila, this is in line. It's in line, of course, with their huge economic crisis. There is this bleeding of money that we regularly analyze as being unsustainable for the US country. There's the American empire and then there's the US as a country. And so, of course, there was also all the problems related to the fact that it was leading nowhere, that it was creating tensions in the region, that it was not solving anything, that the drug traffic was all over, it was not being stopped or anything. So this invasion was a trap, and it took courage somehow, I think, to get out of it. But of course, it is also sending a very strong signal of something ending. And as we will probably discuss, namely the presence of America in the Middle East, which is radically changing now due to huge changes that have occurred in the region that we followed in the previous GEABs, namely around Israel, Saudi Arabia, somehow Iraq, etc. So the whole region is changing, and it makes sense to do this, to make this move. But of course, it questions very much the transatlantic partnership and NATO in the process.
Other thing that I think is really connected, and also the trend that we observe and that you observe in the GEAB, is how this relates to the dollar and the dependency on the US dollar. And I think also in this present moment, we see things happening that are related to that. The dominance of the US, both in terms of geopolitics and in terms of financial, is that something you see as a clear connection, and does the one influence the other?
Well, in fact, it's interesting. It's because it relates very much. As we titled this GEAB Back to the Future, it also took us back to the original anticipations of the GEAB, the ones which found somehow all the work that we've been doing in the past 15 years every month. And the original anticipation was to say precisely that in 1989-91, the Cold War hadn't yet fully ended, that the collapse of the Berlin Wall, which put an end to the USSR, was still waiting for a collapse of the Washington Wall, in the sense of the end of this America that was faced to the USSR. So the USSR has collapsed and has been replaced by something new, Russia, and the federation that they try to organize around them, but that everybody is fighting against. And on the other side, also this American empire, the way it was built in the aftermath of the Second World War and of this Cold War. And so at the time, there was this anticipation of the fall of the Washington Wall, and the take was that this Washington Wall was the dollar wall. And when this Afghanistan event happens and everybody realizes that Afghanistan is the cemetery of empires, because that's where USSR failed, collapsed, and that's now somehow where also for the same reasons the Americans, somehow this old style American empire collapses as well. So we have the place of the Washington Wall. It is in Afghanistan, and now the question is: are we right in the fact that next will be the collapse of this dollar wall? Of course, again, if we look back at all our analysis and what clearly is now on the table, is that most countries are trying to diversify away from the dollar, so the dollar remains still a very, very, of course, important currency. But the trend is to change this dependence on the dollar. The yuan, of course, is one very big element of this questioning. The euro somehow is another one, especially now that the euro is really working on its international dimension, role as an international currency, independent from the dollar. And of course, there's also the whole discussion about central bank digital currencies. The Bitcoin, cryptos, there is this whole discussion and fight around currencies, which all question the American dollar's supremacy. So the situation is there, and we have this very symbolic event of Afghanistan, and of course we have this huge debt that America has piled up above the former huge debt due to the COVID crisis. And so we described that. We will come back on this, I think, in the next GEAB with maybe more details, but we were mostly questioning that. Is we close to this dollar wall collapse?
Yeah, very interesting, because it's also what was described, and I think that's what we see also happening now, is that nobody wants to create chaos, in a sense. So everybody is sort of moving around smoothly in order to be positioned well, so the step-by-step approach can be more effective than this decisions that might really lead into chaos.
Yeah, but at the same time, you do have some crazy players coming into the game, huh? That's the problem too, huh? So you could have people very rather unwise and who could and if they start tickling too much the big China, and I mean everybody should be aware how much China holds the whole world anyway.
Let's go back to what does these developments over the summer, what do they mean for the European-US relationship? Because I think there's a lot of things that happened during the evacuation. Some European countries were really taken by surprise, which other countries weren't, which was already interesting to see that even European partner countries didn't communicate with each other. So what do you think might be the aftermath of what's happened here with this really dependency of Europe on the choices made in the US at this point?
Yes, so voila, our take is that it's helping very much at this point. There's always effect, action, reaction, but today the action taken by namely the French, by the way, but also in line with this supposedly very geopolitical European Commission that we have, von der Leyen. Plus the Afghanistan event, the questioning of NATO. We have to be aware of the fact that Afghanistan was the first external adventure of NATO. So what a failure! You know how much NATO is being questioned. We've noted that Scholz, who could be, but the next chancellor, has called for a revival of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was created not in the aftermath of not at the beginning of the Cold War like NATO, but in '73 in the logic of the Helsinki Agreement, which was about organizing dialogue between the West and the USSR. So we have here an organization which is not about Cold War, but which is about dialogue, which has been a bit forgotten. And Scholz talks about reviving that organization. And what's interesting about this organization is that it gathers Canada and the US, Russia, and Europe. So it is really a far more interesting framework of cooperation than NATO, which has taken us along these dramatic paths that we've seen in the past 20 years, 30 years, including Ukraine, etc. Here and we think that it's going to be difficult for lots of European countries to keep on, getting away from this. But still working with. There's no question about the fact that we should keep in touch with the US. But to diminish all this dependence, this strategic dependence, etc. So France, we think, is in a very good position, and we argument that point in the last edition, is in a very good position now. It's there with the right. It's been consistent about this strategic independence. It's now followed by the current European Commission, of course not so much by the administration behind, and by in certain countries it's really very difficult to move away from this security framework. There is an opportunity, and we think that France is in particular is going to have a very, very strong position on that. And maybe leave a bit the former very consensual tone, let's agree, yes we need, don't you think, trying to convince everyone that there is a need for strategic, and at some point France will not be able to afford following the Europeans and will have at some point to say, okay, it's with us or without. But we are at the UN Security Council. We have responsibilities, and so we can't stay trapped into that. So now if you disagree, we'll have to move away from the EU. Fine. I'm not talking about a Frexit, but something along these lines. And we see very interestingly that Barnier, who's a candidate to the presidency in 2020, French presidency that is to take place in 2022, and who's a super European. I mean, Barnier is super European, and he's campaigning on questioning the European Court of Justice's orders and constraints, etc. So something very similar to what Theresa May did when she was Interior Minister. The EU had three big countries, which was UK, France, and Germany. UK is gone. We think that Germany is going to be rather weakened in the next few months, years, and that France has now the right position, the right stance, and the question is, will it be followed? Knowing that France is not always a very popular member with the other European members.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm sure this will be followed up in the next GEAB, which will appear at 15th of October, of course. Any ideas already on what you're going to tackle? Are there any issues that you're sure that will be in it, or do you want to keep it a surprise?
I can't really say what will be in it. We are, voilà, there will be a calendar. We like very much to have this little exercise now and then. It's to sort of, voilà, to signal all the important dates ahead. This helps us to draw the map of the future that we have, voilà, in the next 3-6 months. And of course, it helps our readers very much to have in mind all these very concrete facts of the future that are prone to change. And that we analyze, saying, well, here this could happen there, this could happen, and an interesting dynamic vision of the future. So we'll that's one thing that we're pretty sure will be in the next GEAB.
And I also know that in looking for this calendar is a very important piece of research, also for your own map of the world and what's happening and correlations that will come. When you look into that. Well, I would recommend everybody to read this GEAB. It's past GEAB. It's really interesting. There's of course also investment trends and recommendations, which are always in the GEAB. And that leaves me to say goodbye to you, Marie-Hélène, and have a good day to everybody who watches this video. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Véronique. Goodbye, everyone.